Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I believe you could hear me. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Okay. So without wasting much time, I've given a rundown of what we have looked at, different aspects we have touched in JavaScript. Most of them we have repeated it multiple times for you to understand very much. And Mr. Manuel did send you a video to look into to see how things are being run. Okay, so I'm going to proceed with this class. Okay, okay. So, all right, I will go straight to what we have tonight. So, we'll be looking at, I did talk about, I did talk about yesterday, we looked into asynchronous JavaScript, where we actually looked into how we could fetch data and all that. So today we'll be diving more deeply into that. Well, I think believe that's the last phase of where we have not retouched so far. So which will also bring us to the end of JavaScript for now, while we proceed with other things. So yesterday we did talked about promises, I did talked about callback, and also talked about events and event handler. So we did talk about that events. What is events? We did differentiate between event listener, and event handler, where we discuss that an event is the action where we have the load, we have reload, we have there we have the event listeners, which we have the on click, on tab, on key press, on mouse, and all of those are event listeners. Once that action is being made, it triggers an event handler. Event handler is basically the function um, which runs when that event is being clicked or linked up with the criterion, where we looked at different types of functions, looked at we looked at the name function and the arrow function, and yes, we also looked into the async function, which is full for asynchronous function. So today we'll be looking more into asynchronous function, where we look into promises. What are promises? Promises are the foundation of asynchronous programming in modern JavaScript. So promise is an object returned by an asynchronous function which represents the current state of the operation. So as the time the promise is returned to the caller, the operation often isn't finished, but the promise object provides methods to handle the eventual success or failure of the operation. Now, yesterday, while I talked about the async function, I did mention and did give illustration on what asynchronous function does. Now you asynchronous functions runs independently of other functions that are when we talk about asynchronous means it runs independently, which doesn't affect the main thread of operation. Now I did made an illustration using athletes running a marathon, which while running the marathon you could stop by and take your bottled water or any energy drink then you continue the the marathon the race. So which is the same thing asynchronous does while the program is running, it does its own thing, then come back to continue with the other operations that are running. Now, yesterday we did talk about the callback, the events, the callback, and the promises. So now which are linked together. So we are looking at focusing on the promises, which would also touch back on callbacks and events. So during yesterday's class, we also where we use the await. Now we use an async to start to know an asynchronous function. It starts with an async, then we use the await function. Now the await keyword we use await keyword to await was the fetch response, data that was going to be that is being fetched. So once the data is being fetched, we actually assign it to variable yesterday yesterday's project code we did assign it to a variable of response we which is the value that is being gotten from the the first value that's been gotten. Now it's been assigned to variable response, which we now return it. So today we are looking at what what is promise? What do we mean by promises? Now, in the async function, we use the keyword. Okay, let's see. Let's pull out yesterday's code from the so yesterday this is our async function. We assigned we have async function fetch data, then we have post response equal to await fetch API slash API dot example dot com dot data, then which we assigned because data is equal to await response dot JSON, then return data, which we had another function with another function, basically the same thing, which is where we said async function fetch data, Now we say try plus response is equal to await fetch data, then plus data equal to response of JSON, then catch error, console.log error, which we use this try catch to handle errors when using asynchronous function, which was basically what we looked into yesterday. Now today we are looking at promise. So let's use an example. Okay, let's put up. Let's take an example of a promise. Fetch an actual data to launch this on live server. Okay. Basically, this is the data that we are trying to fetch. This is the data we're trying to fetch. We have an array of objects. We have array of objects of a product, name, price, image, and type. So this is an array of objects we are trying to fetch. So now we have that fetch. So we are looking into promises. Okay. we have different. So I'm going to put this inside the function. Let's see, function. Then, okay, okay. Okay. So, okay, this is without using asynchronous. This is its method. I'm going to say. Go back to this button. Complete. Okay, this stress with a button here. So button. Between is on the two just touch as me without here. This is just its definition. Okay, then this is the function. So sorry for that. It's- I believe you all can see my screen right now. All right. So I'm going to explain what we have here. Now, this is a piece of function we have written. So we actually first is default, the fetch, which is we are the first variable fetch promise is assigned to a fetch action, which we are fetching information from this link, this API, this endpoint, the endpoint we are supposed to fetch products from this endpoint. Now, which is the first variable is used to fetch. Now we console.log the variable. Then we now await the response, which once the response, we now determine the next action from what we have. So now we have that fetch promise dot then, which is we created another function which uses the resource that's console.log, the response.data. So now we actually checking the status of our API call. This is the call, the API call. We just made a call that fetch promise should fetch the information from this API. Now we want to actually check the status of the call that we just made to use it to determine our next line of action. Now, when we talk about status of, we have status 200, we have status. Each status of an API call has its own has its own. I let's see if we could get a sample. Has of an API call has its own. We have status 200 means okay, the status the function was successful. We have status 500 has to do with the server. Then if we have a response of 422, which means there is an error from somewhere. So basically, the promises actually the first thing, the first endpoint is calling the fetch API, and which is what we have here. The first variable here is used to fetch the information from this endpoint. Then the second, what we now have here is what from this information we just fetch. And there are different ways to apply this. We are not checking the status of each response. And if the rest we want to actually complete the status of this response to use that to determine our next line of action of what are we going to do with these. So remember our definition of promise. The promise is an object returned by an asynchronous function which represents the current state of the operation. At the time the promise is returned to the caller, the operation often isn't finished, but the promise object provides methods to handle the eventual success or failure of the operation. Now, we have a sample here which the first variable is we are fetching the data from this endpoint, which we have. This is the actual value of the endpoint. This is the value the endpoint is giving to us. Now we consult the log is fetch promise, which actually consoling the log this response to see the response that is being gotten from this endpoint. Now we have that fetch promise dot then response. Now we're actually mapping into the response of the what is the actual response. Let's go to our so let's reload this. This is not defined. Text is not defined. So there is text is not defined. It's not defined. So I believe you could see the screen on every request we have a status of 200. Okay, okay. Let's look into HTTP response status. We have status 200. When you have a status of premise, a successful response. Then we have when you have 400, status 400 means you have a bad request. A bad request. Status 400 is bad. There is an error in the response. Then you have 401 means unauthorized. 404 means not found. 403 forbidden. I will drop this link on the Telegram group. You could check out different HTTP response status code and what it does. Now, whenever you're making an API call, you can always understand which when you have a status error, or a status code, you understand which error you are getting or what is the response, the status response of that. So we have status 500, which is internal error. Then we have other. I will drop this on the Telegram group. You check out the response, samples of response, and what it represents. So if you could see this, if we here we have that. So this is one of the response. I have that is 200. So I'm trying to get this to there is no not defined. So what do you mean by not defined? Why I want I great. So that's sample Let's check out why it is considered long. Considered this series is time P crossing by why are you on the phone at the moment? Of course, this can be true. Very sorry for the network issue. Just put sorry for that. I'm trying to put up my device. Sorry for the network breakdown and some issues. So basically, we have this, and when I click on this, I have console.log starting request, then the states. So this is tiny. How do I believe you can see my screen. Then that's the time. How do we increase this? Okay. 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 Size. So we have, I believe you could see this, or you could zoom up, zoom your screen to see what I'm displaying. I can't really research this right now because if I do, it's going to affect a lot of things. So once I click on this, I have my code. So basically, I have my code promises. So I could just comment this. I said, I'll say this replaces as fetch, started fetch, started fetch. So once I click on this, so the first line has run started fetch. Now we have our promise here. State, the state is fulfilled. Then value, we have the value of this, we have the body. So this is we actually returning, fetching the status. So I'm going to comment this for you to have a proper understanding of what we are doing. Now I'll refresh. So the first one is fetching this, and I guess also through .json. So either you use your network tab or use your console.log. I'll go to the response. This is the data that I'm fetching from that the API, this API is returning, which is the same data we have here. The same data we have here. That's the same thing here also. So now on our console.log, we have that we first console.log to know that our code is running. Then we now console.log this variable to fetch the console.log this the fetch. Now we have that on this page we have that our status, we have our promise with our status pending, and the state is fulfilled, which means that the the operation has successfully been fulfilled. Now the value of the response we have, that's the value of the response. We have the header and the URL. So basically, this is, let's take it one after the other so that you guess get complicated. Now, we are actually looking at promises. and how to return promises, which we said we use the promise to actually determine the next line of action, what we want to do once that operation, that fetch has successfully been run, what else we want to do with that. So basically, we have that at console.log this false. We say that when I defined a promise, I did mention that a promise could run and return without said the function returns immediately and your calls back when okay you have that your call you call the asynchronous function passing your callback function okay at the time the promise is returned to the caller the operation often isn't finished but the promise object provides method to handle the eventual success or failure of the operation. So now this line of this line here it says at the time the promise is returned to the caller, the operation often isn't finished. So if you look at the sample we have here, this is our first console.log where we have to know that our code has started running. Then we have the second part, which is the promise. We actually just returning the promise. Then this is the result of this is the is the response. This is the data response of the call that we just made. But you see that the promise returns first with the status of the request, which is pending. Then we have, if we look more deeply, you see that we have the state fulfilled, which means that this endpoint now has been fulfilled. This API fetch has been fulfilled, and the data here on the request has we have fetched the data and it has been. So now I don't really want to go more complicated here. We will look at API response later on. So on every API response you make, you have your response, you have your header, you have your response. So this is the response for this. But first, what we are looking at first here is the promises. Now we console.log our first promise here, which provides us with the state of this request and the value of this request. Now, let's proceed to the next one, which is the next variable which have here. We have that the callback a promise or then request response if console.log receive response with response status. Now, if I click on this, I'm returning the status of the response that we are expecting. Now we have that So sorry for the network glitch. I believe we are following. So firstly, we calling the fetch API and assigning the return value to the fetch promise variable. Immediately after, we log the fetch promise variable, which results gives us an output of promise states is pending, telling us that we have a promise object and it has it has a state whose value is pending, and the pending means that the fetch operation is still ongoing. So that is when you have the state pending, promise state pending means that the fetch operation is still ongoing. That's why we have the promise state as pending. Then thirdly, we pass a handler function into the then promise or then method. When and if the fetch operation succeeds, the promise will call our handler, passing in the response object which contains the server response. Then we now have on the fourthly, we now logged a message that we have started the request. So that is the explanation for this line of code. First is we assigned a fetch to our API. Secondly, we consult.log the promise to get the promise that the state of our operation to know if it's depending or it's still ongoing, which we have here that the firstly because the fetch API assigning it a return value of fetch promise variable created a variable. We assigned the core API fetch to a variable called fetch promise. Then secondly, we consult the log the the variable which our fetch promise variable, which displays gives us that our promise state is still pending, means that the request is still ongoing. Then we now have another function here, a function handler here, which passes, which when the operation, this is when the operation it succeeds, this when the operation succeeds. What happens when the operation succeeds? We actually console.log the server's response. So that's what we do here. We are consoling the response of this data. We console.log the response. That's what we did here. Then we now console.log. Okay, this is now what we are. So this is basically how we use play around with promise. So this is our rest on our console.log. First is the console.log the promise to get the state of our operation, which means that our dependent means that the operation, the fetch data is still running. We now console.log started running. Then we now console the received response of the status response of our server. Now I don't want to go very much deeply into this. This is basically what you need to know on promises. Then let's look at promise terminology in order for you to understand that. So promise always so so promise can be in one of these three stages. We have pending, fulfilled, or rejected. So your promise can either be pending or fulfilled or rejected. So when it's pending, when you have the state, a promise state pending, it means that the promise has been created and the asynchronous function.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Um, please can we all leave the call? I can't actually like say what I want to say because this is recording on. So let's leave the call. Tomorrow we continue the class. Thank you very much. Please let's be fast and leaving the call so that this recording will stop. Thank you. See you guys tomorrow. Bye.
I'm so sorry for the network. I've been talking on the background. I think the network has been so bad.
Because I'm waiting for you to leave. I want this so this recording will end, bro. Oh, what is this?